Hi, everybody. This is Skip Balch, the sales handicapper. Thank you for joining us today for the latest episode of Your Winning Edge, where we talk to sales leaders who make the call, who own the number, and then also have to live with the outcome. Today's going to be a little bit different because this is a person who has been there, done that, has got the t-shirt, a lot of different areas of management in the financial sector. And he is currently leading an organization through 41 agencies being pulled together, being merged together with about 5 different generations that are being represented in the sales organization. And so I'm really excited today to have the perspective of Jon Pace. Jon is the Chief Growth Officer at Choice Financial Group. Jon, welcome to the show.
Hey, Skip, thanks for having me. It's great to see you. I appreciate being included. I've looked at some of the work that you're doing with others. I think it's fantastic and excited to share whatever I can and may.
Well, let's start this way so that we can give everybody the right foundation. Take, if you will, just 2 minutes and let the audience know what it is that you're doing and what is it about this situation that so excites you to be able to want to do it.
Sure, sure. So I am, as you said, the Chief Growth Officer at Choice Financial Group. Choice is a 4-year-old company. We're actually a roll-up, a private equity-backed roll-up of predominantly Main Street insurance agencies. Today, we're in 25 states. We've now made actually 43 acquisitions
Mm,
across the board.
okay.
We're in property, casualty, employee benefits. We do individual insurance. We do life and disability, all those sorts of things, through our agencies. And and we're sort of in a roll up where we're pre-consolidation, meaning we've got those agencies functioning independently, but on a connected basis. And so how we build that connected tissue before we put them into things like regions and industry groups, which is a
Okay.
natural progression. We would call it
Right.
chapter 2 in our life. That's the business that we're running. And you ask about what's so exciting, and it's interesting, particularly when I interview prospective employees here, and particularly younger folks that are being wooed into some form of financial services. Tell them, and frankly, I really believe this. I mean, insurance is an unbelievably exciting capital market, a global
Mm.
capital market. And by that, I mean, listen, insurance companies, for the most part, particularly casualty insurance companies, they're running businesses where they never know their cost of goods sold because casualty claims can go on infinitely. Think about your client base or you running a business where you don't really know how to capture your cost of goods sold. So we're a distributor of that capital. We're the investment bankers of insurance capital. And one of the things that excites me is you can't really run a democratic republic if you don't have a rule of law, right, that begets
Right.
property
Right.
rights. It has a
Right.
central banking system and has a functioning insurance marketplace. And so while most of the buying public, be it corporate or individual, thinks about this marketplace as somewhat commoditized because there are lots of carriers that are out there
Hmm.
that underwrite the risks, obviously, that we present and represent to our client base. A lot of it think about it, but it's actually highly technical and somewhat regulated. So you really have to sort of know what you're doing. And that combination to be able to help other people run their business as well is what is exciting to me because that leads into value-based conversations. Skip, how do I help you make your business more successful? And oh, by the way, I can do it with boring old insurance.
Well, it's funny. When I was probably 18 years old, I was flying on a jet from my dad's place to back to where I was living in Dallas, and I sat next to a guy, and he, I asked him, I said, "So what do you do for a living?" He said, I work in the best industry in the world, the insurance industry." And I said, "What makes it the best industry in the world?" He said, "Because if you're just really nice to people and you put them in the right products, you've got an annuity for the rest of your life." And he said, "I started at 19 selling insurance." And I think he was 50 at the time.
Yeah.
And he said, "I still have 70% of the people that I sold my first 10 years." And he said, it's an annuity. It's the best sales job there is. And it was
Well,
funny. I thought to myself, I wonder why I didn't get into insurance, but there you go.
hey, there's still time, and we have openings.
Yeah.
So it's funny.
Okay.
My brother only had one sibling, and God rest his soul. Wonderful guy. Grew up always wanted to be an attorney. Became an attorney. Spent 35 years at the firm where he started, and spent the last 15 years as managing partner of a significant firm. And really, really great guy. And I was working for Mercer, human resources and
Mhm.
human capital consulting firm at the time, and I was running sales for them. And he called me up one day, we're chatting. He says, "By the way, tell me, what do you do? What do you really do?" And I said, "Well, Mike, I teach actuaries how to sell." He said, "Oh, my goodness." He said, That's harder than teaching lawyers how to sell."
That's true. That's true, and it's funny you should say that because I'm currently about a third of the way through my new book, and that is Everybody Sells.
Yeah.
But no one wants to admit it. And the reality is everybody sells. No matter what you're doing, everybody sells. And it's funny to have to teach actuaries how to sell. That's a bar that I'm not even sure I want to try to
Well,
climb.
the first thing you have to get through is to convince them that n equals 1 is not a material sample, because 'cause they'll always say, "Oh, I tried that once." But
Yeah.
my sister-in-law is terrific. She spent her entire career as a elementary school teacher, and it makes her so mad when I tell her she's the greatest salesperson in the world. And she said, "I don't sell." I said, "No, actually, we salespeople, actually, if we're good, we're educators."
Yeah.
And that is one of those immutable truths that you and I have talked about is
Right.
if you're in the and your friend on the airplane, if you're in the education business and you're helping people learn about how they can get better, they'll appreciate that. Reminds
Well,
me of a great Winston Churchill quote
yeah.
where he said, "I love to learn, I just hate to be taught."
Yeah. There you go. There you go. Well, it's interesting for me, having sold for really almost 50 years now. What I've discovered is that selling is not about telling. It's about walking people through their own discovery process. I can sell anything to anybody once, but if they don't own it, then it was a transaction and it's not a customer. Right? I tell people all the time, you don't have a customer after the first sale. You have a transaction. It's when they buy from you a second time that you have a customer.
That's a beautiful perspective. And so you've kind of always got to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. So let's get to the here and now. I'm sorry,
Where are you
you
going
guys are
now?
moving faster. You guys are moving faster than AI.
We-
I think the age range is probably pretty accurate that I was giving you 70 to 25. So what's that like having to manage? How did you used to manage groups like that or people in the agency world? And then now what's different today now that you've got five versus maybe three?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Great question because we oftentimes think, regardless of our businesses, we oftentimes think of diversity as somewhat being either racial or gender oriented,
Mhm.
but there's generational diversity that's just as important.
Yeah.
And so if you think about 5 generations in the workplace, so we've got about 450, 60 people today in the organization. And as you
Okay.
said, pretty quickly. And you look across all manner of diversity. We represent that. Since we represent Main Street insurance agencies, we kind of look like Main Street that's out there, but
Mhm.
that overlooked element is many times in lots of situations, whether you are in a management role or you're in a client service role, you're facing someone who's not from your generation. So the most important thing to think about is, and by the way, asking really effective questions and listening and remembering is hard work. And that's so critical to what we do. It's particularly critical because if you're thinking about putting yourself in the shoes of the other person, it's easier to do if a couple of OGs do it. We kind of probably think a lot like. It's not so, it's not the same if, I mean, one of our agents yesterday was telling me he's in New York, he's in the life business. He said, what's so gratifying today is that his generation, he's 62, and his generation, he said, I'm now beginning to serve their children and their spouses and their families because I've been referred by their parents. And he said it's
Hmm.
a completely different relationship. They're teaching me in many
Yeah.
ways, but the
Well,
common denominator. Go
let me
ahead.
ask you a question though. Is it easier? Are you finding it's easier for somebody in an older generation to lead in the younger generation, or what's happening when you've got a 30-something really, really hot manager, producer that's moving up, and they've got to manage somebody in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Which one's easier? Which one causes more dynamic?
Well, so it's hard to generalize because in that instance, coaching is what matters. You can coach up, you can coach down, but it's the conversations that you have with each other to get to a point. Now, what I do find is that the older generations find working with and coaching today's younger generations more frustrating than the younger generations find the older generations. And in that way, I think that has a lot to do with technology and the way, for example, our kids grew up. And I think COVID had a lot to do with a detachment
Okay.
arena. What's really hard to do is to get the youngest high potentials to get comfortable with non-electronic interaction and with asking good
Wow.
questions. That is
Okay.
coaching, and that is a learned habit. There's no such thing in my mind as a born seller. There are
Agreed.
styles, and always be true to your style. There are also some fundamentals, but the idea is to get comfortable with your discomfort and to go try and practice again and again.
So
And getting over
is it,
that one more thing,
yeah,
they
yeah.
communicate in that generation with each other much more electronically than we do, right? But if you're a prospect, the differentiator is having the emotional maturity and intelligence to be able to say, I have to speak to Skip in his language. I have to ask questions that elicit from me knowledge from Skip that I'm going to need to know in order to try to position myself to help.
Well, it's funny. You should say that because one of the things that I review with salespeople is the issue of, you talk, well, what is their love language? Somebody says,
Yeah.
well, when you talk to them in their love language, and my answer is their love language is whatever language they're speaking to you in. That's their love language. If they want longer explanations, that's their love language. If they want facts and nothing but the facts, that's their love language. And you as a salesperson, your ability to adapt to your prospect's love language is absolutely key. And in fact, one of the chapters of my book is all about likability. And I think the essence of likability is kind of like value and it's kind of like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. And so, what is your likability? Well, the best way to start off is to make sure that you're communicating to them in a language that they already communicate in. And so, it's interesting to me that the frustration that older managers have with younger people is, to your point, they're used to having conversations. They're used to having face to face. Let's get on the phone. Let's get on Zoom even, but let's
Yeah.
have a conversation versus, and the younger generation now is very uncomfortable with that, or can be. And in fact, if I'm hiring the younger generation, that becomes a real key interview issue. And that is, can you talk to me like an adult? Can you talk to me and show me empathy and demonstrate? If you can't, I got a real hard time because ultimately, if you're in the service business, it's a relationship.
Well, we test for that. That
Mhm.
we test for
Okay.
that very thing, because we think it's really important. Data driven. Anything that helps us get inside the mind of a potential colleague is something that we want to do. But the flip side of that coin is also how to coach in this case, we're talking about the older manager to say,
Hmm.
just imagine for a moment that you're 25. You were 25 once. The good news that you were 25 once, and you can remember the 25-year-old has never been 65. So they have to pretend. We could say,
Right.
now imagine that you're 25 and you're talking to Fred or Sally, right? Now put yourself in their shoes. And I love the love language, right? But for them, how would you speak to them to get
Mhm.
to the desired set of behaviors that you're looking for?
Absolutely. So you've got people, it's a very people, very relationship business. You and I talked earlier. You guys are clearly making use of AI. You're making use of AI and analyzing policies and plans. You're making use of AI for upsells and so forth. Talk a little bit more about how AI is being adopted within the organization and the impact that it's already having, if it is having any.
Well, I would say again, we talk about ourselves as we're in our first chapter, and we're very much in an exploratory mode. And we have some partnerships that deploy AI on our behalf. And so for us, the first point of view is because it's a relationship business, and we fundamentally believe that our no technology is going to disintermediate the importance of
Mhm.
relationships. We
Mhm.
first of all think about what are the repetitive tasks that can be done faster and better than we do them themselves. And so across the insurance landscape, whether it's an agency like us, again, a middleman, we don't take
Mhm.
any risk. We're the advisor on behalf of our clients, and we stand between them and the insurance companies or other service providers for them if they happen to be self-insured. But in those instances, um, we're if you think about policy checking as an example, or you think about from an underwriting standpoint, how do you evaluate risk and how an insurance company price risk from a client service rep standpoint, how do they help me administer policies? One of the coolest features is to be able to do checking for best in class. So you might say, hey, I've got a client and they're in the trucking business. And so they've got lots of transportation risk, let's say third party casualty type
Mhm.
risk, some property risk because they're big and expensive trucks. But you think about how do I insure and manage that risk that's out there? And we also could say, using AI to say, now, who are the great trucking markets in this world? So we might be with so they might be with a federated, but there are four other carriers that say, no, we make a market in this and we make a market in this kind. We want people that are, that are multi-state, or we want them that are closer to home, or we only want rigs
Mhm.
of a certain
Yeah.
size. And then of that size, what kind of policy features and conditions? As I said, it was a technical business. So inside, it's
Mhm.
very legalistic. So inside a policy, what are they willing to cover that somebody isn't willing to cover? It's
Right.
just scores of hours of research when AI can say, okay, here's here's option A, here's option B, here's option C. Here are the differences. And then as you summarize those differences, here's sort of terms and conditions and that you get in coverage, and here are pricing differences. Now you're really smart when you go talk to a client.
Right. And then this is done in minutes now, and obviously it doesn't require the staff that it used to take in order to be able to do that as well, right? So when it comes to the use of AI, an individual, broker, advisor, whatever, do you guys just say go use what you want to, or what's your policy for individuals using AI?
So we actually have we spend a lot of time because we're growing and we're integrating, thinking about systems integrity. And so we're probably very conservative
Mhm.
in how we approach that.
Well, you're
We're
also
in
in a very highly regulated industry, right? And so it's just, I mean, that's the
we
last
deal
thing you
with
need is
sensitive
to have
information.
exactly.
On the health side, it's all HIPAA protected information. So
Right.
we're pretty paranoid in an appropriate way about that. So at the center, we are testing. Now we have vendors who provide certain services for us. So we sort of understand what they provide and how that's particularly protected. Here's an example. We're trying to understand revenue flows. So when you report a win today, hey, I sold XYZ Corporation a corporate package for $25,000 in commission income. So in our world, okay, that's recorded as a $25,000 sale. That's interesting. What's fascinating is when does that $25,000 hit our books? And
Yep.
when is it cash? And
What's the revenue recognition? When's the revenue
revenue, right.
recognition?
And
Yep.
by types of insurance, lines of insurance, and the way that it happens to be billed and financed, it's kind of all over the map. And you do that with thousands and thousands of sales, you've got something complex to be able to track that. So, but to do that, it's one thing to get inside the pipeline and say, "Oh, they recorded all these wins." It's another to get inside the P&L and say,
Right.
"Ah, here's when you should expect it to book," because that has all kinds of security risks. So we sort of study, from a CRM perspective, what's sort of the right, how do we keep that integrity in place and also make sure that we say to our investors, we have a handle on our cash flow. So we begin to explore. The other thing we do, which I think is the right thing to do, is, there are a lot of frenemies in this industry. And
Hmm.
if you're around a long time, you worked with a lot of people, you have wonderful relationships with people. And listen, all industries are included. There is plenty of room for great people. And if you keep your networks up, I'm able to say to my peers that I know and have and trust and have relationships with, talk to me about how you're approaching, in this instance, AI and its utilization. And how are you doing it in a secure environment where you're charged with keeping data in place? So I think we're just in our infancy, but there are repetitive and slow is worth a look.
Well, so but as an individual contributor, right? So you're saying if I've got Chat or if I've got Claude or one of these,
Right.
and I want to go ahead and research on an individual, research on a particular company, I can go ahead and do that on my own computer as long as I'm not going through your network, or
That's
can
right.
I do it through your network? Is that right?
Do
So
it on
you
your
don't
own.
do it on your own. So
Yeah.
there's
I
a
do
group along.
ChatGPT on my
There you go. Me
and
as I do too.
And yeah,
Yep.
but yeah, for the producer, it's a wonderful research tool, proposal preparation tool to be able to be quicker and smarter and to look prettier.
And so as long as the producer is not exposing PII or confidential information on Chat or Claude or whichever one, then you guys are fine with get to it, and you're not regulating internally their use of AI in order to be able to do the job that they need to do.
As long as I'm not exposing other nefarious actors to any of our data.
Right.
Right. So that's why we say, listen, if you're going to use it today, use your own device
Right.
in order to do that, and then take your output in order to determine how you're going to utilize that in your
Well,
business.
but it's also your input though is it's not your asset. This information with any CRM, it's not your asset as an individual contributor. It's the company's asset.
That's right.
And so there are, I'm sure you've got governance rules that says this is what you can utilize and what information you can share in
That's
AI
right.
in order to be able to get it versus not. Okay. And that's really the key thing. There's so much shadow AI going on right now, which basically says, I'm still doing it. I'm doing it on my own computer. So you're not
Yeah.
tracking it. I'm not
Yeah.
going through your server. So you're not tracking it. Right. But I'm still doing it to be able to do my job. And there's a little bit of, trust but verify in there in every industry, whether it's regulated or it's not. Their companies don't want their proprietary data going out more and more. In fact, that's what I think is one of the biggest things that's slowing adoption for a lot of companies is they haven't figured out yet how to make sure that my data stays here and doesn't go someplace else.
I mean, we will adopt policy as we grow. It's funny. Years ago, when our kids were, we had moved from one city to another, and our kids started a new school, and my wife was on a committee, and the school happened to be new itself. And she said, "What about X, Y, Z?" And one of the administrators said, "We should get a policy for that. We got to get a policy on that." And we talk about and joke about it ourselves as we think about our own governance and our own evolution. There are times when we'll go, "We need a corporate policy on that." And so and we try to make sure as managers, we have obligations to our colleagues and also to our investors to be good stewards and I mean, I think we need to study a lot, but we also need to be, at the end of the
Mhm.
day, it is the enemy of good. And so we need to also begin to execute on things that we believe to be true. And so the art form there is coming to a point of decision to say, here's what we believe to be true right now. Let's go forward.
Yeah, this is to your point. We're not going to let perfect be the enemy of good. I think it was Voltaire that said that. So let's talk for a moment then about okay, this is great. We've touched on what it's like to manage a multi generational workforce in a regulated industry. Where you're in chapter one right now. You're still evolving. You're still exploring. You're still discovering to a
That's
large
right.
extent, what have we got here? But the numbers still got to get hit, right? You still
Right.
got to be able to grow. So right now you're in a very competitive, to your point, and commoditized in many respects industry. Unlike software industries or startups or even SaaS companies that are still shooting for 20 and 30% growth year over year, you guys are a little bit more conservative than that. Yes?
Yes, yes, we are. This business is fairly cyclical, and a lot of that is driven predominantly out of the property and casualty market, and a lot of that is driven out of the reinsurance terms and conditions, and that's largely a London-based business. London, in many respects, is our Wall Street, and
Gotcha.
and that's sort of the global center for how this capital gets aggregated and distributed, and it finds itself very quickly into pricing on Main Street, business owner policies
Right.
for the most part.
Right.
And we're in Leader's Edge is a publication I respect. And it's funny, they're out with their first quarterly review right now. And for the first time in 9 years, there is this sort of significant softening of the market. And so that there's more capacity because there have been less losses, less catastrophic losses. So there's more ability to underwrite. So more capital flows to that. So there's more competition.
Hmm.
Clients know there's more shopping. Competitors lean in. Don't you think we run to our top prospects and say, it's a soft
Hmm.
market. You might
Yeah.
want to check some things out. If we've done our homework, we've got a little bit more
Right.
compelling story behind that. And so that's an area we find ourselves in. So that's one, and there is compression, and so you've got to retain above the market. So stewardship really matters. So if the unit value of a client goes down 5% or 8%, if you're in South Florida and property, it's 30%, right? Holding on to more than you budget is one way to winning more. So being very aggressive on the outreach is important, rounding your accounts. So there are always add-on opportunities. And my pithy little line is that 110% of clients who give you more of their business don't fire you. So always be educating on why would you need more cyber limits, or you don't have an umbrella today, or whatever that happens to, or boy, I have a benefits division. And so that's one way to begin to solidify and ride out a soft market. The other is to cross sell. So as we have 40 some agencies that are out there, and we internally try to create this connective tissue. You get them together, you have them talking all the time, you
Mm.
try to create a culture, right? I've got a great partner of ours who joined us last year. He's up in Hartford, and we were talking about cross selling. He said, John, you got to understand. He said, it's not that I don't want to do that. He said, and it's not that I haven't had. He said, you want to talk about whether I've had partners before. He said, I've never had teammates before, and so it's into that environment where you begin to connect
Yeah.
people and build relationships so that they trust you to come in. But when you do that, when you do those simple things, they're tedious. They might not be
Hmm.
complicated, but if you aggregate that amount of discipline, you stand the greatest chance to at least stay flat, right? So if that's say that's 50% of our business. In the other sides of your business where you have tremendous upside, for example, if you're in group health today or have been for the last 35 years, that is a steady increase. Now, there are whole lots of
Yeah.
health and public policy issues behind
Right.
that. That might be podcast number 3, Skip. But in that world, you've got steady increases in pricing, right? That's going
Sure.
on.
Right.
If you're running a P&L, that's a little bit of a ballast or a buffer. So for us, we should be adding more health and benefits agencies and clients to the roll up relative to the PNC to become that ballast underneath the volatility in PNC.
Right.
Then you think about the individual business, particularly in life insurance. So if you do more life, so we're specializing now in high net worth personal lines. Right, that's a wonderful service to provide. Everybody wants their beach house to be standing after the storm. I always kid that the most loyal client you get is the business owner for whose 16-year-old son and daughter you just got auto insurance. That's sort of very important. And then life and disability, those things, they add ballast to your P&L. And so you're running a hedge fund internally to try to navigate through a soft market because last year, the average organic growth rate in our business in the US across all sizes of agencies was 4.5%. At the beginning of the year, the target was 9, but we ended up at 4.5% because that marketplace took hold. So as some investment bankers tell us today, this year's 1 or 2% is last year's 6%. So what you want to manage towards is whatever that market median is, you got to manage above that.
So again, it's 5% growth is a good target in your market, right? Organic growth.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, for one, I'm absolutely expecting that my premiums on my homeowners insurance are going to go down this year, and we'll see
Skip,
whether or not that
I'll
happens.
check that for you.
You what?
I'll check that for you.
Okay, appreciate that. Yeah,
Hopeful
appreciate
if I
that.
make
Yeah, well, both of us. So it would. I think it. What's interesting is it's a different industry, but the issues are the same. You've got a situation where a rising tide floats all boats. Meaning, if you got partners that you can get, and they've got products that they're selling because your client needs it, then the client is seeing I've got a synergistic solution here, right? And so everybody winds up moving up. Everybody winds up with a higher retention level. To your point, banks have known this for years. If I've got 3 products with you as my bank, odds of me leaving are pretty remote.
That's right.
And especially if you ever tried changing bank accounts, it's a pain still. It's amazing to me. You're better off just quitting one and then just starting from scratch with some of these new online ones, but that's a different issue. What when you're looking at this growth, and it's again, if you're talking to a Gen Xer or a Gen Z, and you're talking in terms of 5% growth, they're going, really? Okay, well, okay, that's no big deal, right? Now you know how tough it is, but they're going, that's no big deal. And then you talk to somebody that's a boomer, mature, that goes, you know what? I've seen boom times and I've seen lean times, and 5% is not easy, guys. And so there's that tension that winds up developing that says, no, you're not taking this with a sense of urgency that you should. And the young guys saying, hey, give it a rest. It'll be fine, right? How do you manage that?
Well, so while we're having a conversation about organic growth, we're talking about top line. At
Yes.
the end of the day, EBITDA is what matters. And so
Yeah.
you're managing, both the top and the bottom of the P&L at the same time. And what we found is there are techniques to put in place to manage EBITDA, even when there's volatility in your P&L. So you
Sure.
sort of have to be good enough at managing to do both of those things. Part of it, I think, to your point, is you also need to be able to. And I think this is very important in organic growth. And it's very important when people are in early in their careers and beginning to take off, is that we have to play long ball. I mean, in the insurance industry in America has been a great get rich slow strategy. And this is one of the original American industries. Nobody does kind of without it. And again, because it's ubiquitous, it gets
Right.
money. Oh, that's fine. But the fact of the matter is a you've got to take a long view in this business, because cycles will come and go, as they will. If you're thinking about, I got to hit it out of the park this year, go to Goldman Sachs and be a bond trader. But if you're thinking,
Right.
hey, I want my next 10, 20-year average to be
Right.
5, 6%. I mean, listen, money doubles at 10% every 7 years. So
Yep.
you've got to be
Yep.
able to, and we've got to coach them to think that way, because one of
Well,
the
but there's also going to be a DNA that is going to be present where they're going to go, okay, this person already does think that way. This person, and so you're able to identify it simply by asking questions and doing analysis and assessments. And it says, okay, this person naturally has the long view, and so we can build with that. So that
Right, as I
works.
said, we do some we have invested in some testing protocols,
Mhm.
2 types that we think help give us an insight into that DNA to make sure, "Hey, will you fit here in our culture?" So we're pretty judicious on the front end. And then on the back end, we are with things like support and mentorship. No producer comes here that doesn't have an individual mentor assigned to
Okay.
them. And even the
So
43-year-old second career, third career cat gets a mentor.
hey, listen, it's new to them, right? So you still
Yeah.
need that mentor that's been there, right? So that works, right? That's okay. So this has been an excellent conversation, on I think on several levels. Number one, it's a completely different industry than most people think about, and
Mhm.
yet it's still being disrupted by AI, but maybe in different ways. It's one of the few industries where I think, to your point, ageism still exists, but it's not nearly as fatal in the insurance industry, especially if you've got relationships and you're taking the long view. You want that person that has got relationships of 20 years and 30 years, and that's what makes a lot of sense. The other thing I think is that I love the fact you're in chapter one of this roll up and so forth, which means that there's still a lot that you guys are learning about what you've acquired
Yeah.
and how we're going to make this work and so forth. So there's still an awful lot that can go wrong. There's still, however, an extraordinary amount that can go right. And I think that for other companies to take the long view, not the short view, recognize that there's a tremendous amount of talent across all the generations, figure out how to maximize and how to optimize the gray hairs and the experience, and how putting those together with people that are just coming on. That is not a problem. That's an opportunity. And AI, I think, becomes the great equalizer and the great teaching assistant that is needed. I thank John. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, I just think about what you said. What's kind of cool, as you said, about our looking ahead to chapter 2 now, is that you think about our partners. So if you owned an agency or a part of an agency, you joined us, you become a merger partner. So we talk of ourselves as a partnership. And in that partnership, you've got youth under 30, to your point, and we have some gray hairs up to 85
Oh my
active
goodness,
partners who don't intend to
that's
retire
awesome.
to retire. Now
Awesome.
these is and he is unbelievable. So um and so you think about the folks that sold their business into this roll up. They trusted our story enough to become a part of it. The vast majority of them spent 20, 25 years, some longer, doing something really, really well. And the marketplace is really good for our business. And so it was pretty frothy. They found a way to monetize that. They thought optimally for their families. And our model is we want you to stay, and 99% of them want to stay. Now, in that particular model, right now, you got a chance at building the culture, because
Mhm.
most of them look up after this 25-year journey and they say, now I want to stay. Now I want to know, I want to look horizontally. What else is out there? I know what I know, but what is out there? They're excited for that. And the vast majority of those say to people like me, what else can I do here?
Mhm.
And that's just really an exciting electric culture to be around because nobody sells and leaves. We
Right.
won't buy that from. And so we got this regenerative effect. Now, lots of them have children in the business. And so now they've got a perpetuation plan. A trick for us that I found when I was working for big public companies that isn't resonant in chapter one is to be able to say to someone in New Orleans, have you ever thought about Chicago? We got a really nice opportunity there, or vice versa. Hey, we've got a new thing in Dallas and you happen to be in Miami. Would you be interested? That is when that'll be an element to accelerating this culture build and connective tissue. So those kinds of opportunities, you're right, we could screw it up tomorrow. And I'm sure there are competitors that hope we do. But the opportunity to be able to chew on meaty things like that in such a vital industry just are the kinds of things that get you revved up every morning. So I hope I'm able to do this for a long time.
That's awesome. John, thank you again. I appreciate it very much. And we uh, we will look forward. I will look forward to following your path into chapter two.
Thank you, Skip. It's been a pleasure.